Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. When you think of being awake and being asleep, the mind immediately draws a boundary. One side belongs to action, responsibility, conversation, light. The other belongs to silence, drifting, the unmeasured passage of dreams. But the line between them is not sharp. It is soft, like mist across water, or the faint light of dawn seeping into night. You imagine yourself moving from one to the other, crossing cleanly, but in truth, the states mingle. At times, you are not fully in either place. At times, the brain allows both at once. This blurred edge is more familiar than you realize. You touch it in the moments before sleep arrives, when your thoughts lose their structure. They shift from clear sentences to drifting fragments from deliberate intention. Two images that appear unbidden. A face emerges, then vanishes. A sound ripples through your awareness, but you cannot tell if it came from outside or from inside you. This is the hypnagogic state, the gentle slope from wakefulness into dreams. Here, time bends. You may believe you have been drifting for only a few seconds, when in truth, 10 minutes have passed, or the opposite, you feel you have lived through a long, wandering vision. Yet the clock insists that only a blink of time has gone. The border is uncertain, because the brain is uncertain. Neurons begin to fire in patterns that resemble sleep, but not fully. They echo REM rhythms, flickers of dream woven into the fabric of waking thought. Science shows that these borders are not rare intrusions. They are part of daily life. At night, when you descend into sleep, you cross this blurred zone. In the morning, when you climb out of dreams, you cross it again. Twice every day, you stand at the threshold, half in one world, half in another. But the truth is deeper still. Even in broad daylight, the line can flicker. Awake, you can slip into small moments of dreamlike awareness. The mind, for all its brilliance, is never bound completely to one side. Imagine you are listening to a friend speak. Their words flow, but suddenly your attention slides away. You drift into an image of something you saw yesterday, or into a plan for tomorrow. For a moment, the world outside fades. Then you blink, and you are back, nodding, present again. This is not full dreaming, not full wakefulness either. It is the blurred line in action. The mind slips, briefly, into its own theater. Daydreams belong to this overlap. They are not mistakes or distractions, but signs of how fluid consciousness truly is. The brain is not built for a single track of attention. It moves in rhythms, outward to the world, inward to imagination, outward again. Each rhythm pulls you across the border, letting waking life mingle with dreamlike thought. The border is also evident in exhaustion. When you are very tired, the line almost disappears. Your brain, struggling to maintain wakefulness, lets microdreams slip through. These are called microsleep, seconds-long lapses where parts of the brain shut down, even while your eyes remain open. Truck drivers describe blinking at the wheel, only to find themselves further down the road with no memory of crossing it. Students staring at textbooks sometimes realize they have lost time. They gaze fixed, but their minds adrift. These are not failures, but reminders that sleep is always close, that the line is porous. Neurologically, this blur arises because the brain does not switch on and off like a machine. It is not awake one moment and asleep the next. Instead, it carries regions and networks that can behave differently at the same time. While most of the cortex is alert, small areas can slip into sleep-like patterns, while dreams dominate the sleeping brain. Sensory pathways may still flare with waking awareness, letting outside sounds and sensations slip inside. It is like twilight, where some lamps are lit, others not yet extinguished. You stand in half-light, in between. The brain thrives on these gradients, and perhaps it is good that the line blurs. If waking and dreaming were sealed off completely, you could not carry fragments across. Inspiration would not flow. Creativity would stall. The painter would not recall the strange landscapes of her dreams to turn into art. The physicist would not wake with a solution to a problem that seemed impossible by daylight. The poet would not borrow images from the night to give voice to wonder. The blurred line is not only gentle, it is necessary. Philosophers, too, have noticed this. They ask, how do you know you are awake? How do you know this moment is not itself a dream? The brain can mimic wakefulness inside sleep and mimic sleep inside wakefulness. Then perhaps the certainty of either state is less firm than it feels. Descartes once doubted everything, wondering if a malicious spirit tricked his perceptions. Eastern traditions have long described waking life as dreamlike, urging awareness of how fragile our boundaries are. Science frames it differently, but with the same awe. Brain imaging reveals that networks active in dreams are not switched off in the day. They remain humming quietly, shaping thought and memory. At times they rise, flood the mind with images, and then recede. The dream is always close. For you, lying in bed, this truth is not abstract. You feel it in the way thoughts soften at night. You feel it in the way a morning dream can cling to you, coloring your mood long after you rise. You feel it in the way a daydream interrupts, carrying you for a few minutes somewhere else entirely. The line between awake and asleep is blurred because you are built that way. Your mind is a shifting tide, not a solid wall. It moves in and out, bends and blends. So tonight, when you close your eyes, notice the moment you cross. Notice how thoughts scatter and images bloom. Notice how the outside world dims but does not vanish, how the inside world rises but does not fully claim you. Stay with that blurred moment, gentle and fleeting. Know that it belongs not only to sleep, but to waking too. The line is not a boundary. It is a blending. It is dawn and dusk together. And when you sense it, you sense the deeper truth that the brain does not live in binaries, but in shades. Asterisk, the line between waking and dreaming is not as solid as we imagine. We like to think of sleep and wakefulness as two distinct worlds, night and day, consciousness and unconsciousness, clarity and the drifting haze of dreams. But in truth, the boundaries blur. Even in the middle of a bright morning, as you sit, upright, eyes open, perhaps sipping coffee or scrolling through words on a glowing screen, your brain is capable of dipping into something that looks very much like the dream state. Scientists sometimes call these microsleeps. They last seconds, sometimes only a fragment of a second. The eyes may remain open, the body upright, but the brain briefly steps sideways into patterns of electrical activity that resemble rapid movement to sleep. In those moments, you are both awake and not awake, inhabiting a threshold that most people pass through without noticing. What does it mean? That the brain can flicker like this, inserting fragments of dream time into the day. It suggests that consciousness is not a steady beam of light, but something closer to a candle flame, wavering, bending in the currents of neural rhythms, the fragile boundary of waking. Life depends on a network of brain regions working together to sustain attention. The prefrontal cortex, sitting just behind the forehead, plays conductor, directing thoughts, suppressing distractions, and ordering the sequence of conscious moments. But it is not tireless. Attention drifts. The deeper parts of the brain, especially the thalamus, which regulates sensory input, and the brainstem, which sets the rhythm of alertness scans, slip into modes that mimic sleep. Imagine a guard at a watchtower, scanning the horizon. For hours, the guard stands straight, vigilant. Yet, every so often, fatigue pulls at the eyelids, and the guard nods off for a breath of time before snapping awake again. That is your brain on an ordinary afternoon, present, alert, but vulnerable. Two tiny hidden lapses. Daydreams versus microsleeps not. All flickers are the same. Daydreaming, which most people know well, is a softer wandering of thought. It involves the brain's default mode network, a set of regions that light up when attention turns inward. In a daydream, you imagine, plan, or replay old conversations. It feels as if time passes differently, but you remain tethered to the awareness of being awake. MICROSEEPs are more dramatic. They are not simply thoughts wandering. They are temporary intrusions of actual sleep-like activity. In an EEC, those recordings of the brain's electrical patterns, they appear as slow waves or bursts of REM-like signals. But those few seconds, the brain has truly dipped away. That is why people driving long distances sometimes wake up to find that they do not remember passing the last mile marker. For a moment, their consciousness vanished into a pocket of dream-time, flickers, as survival strategy. Why would the brain risk this? Why allow dreamlike states to invade waking life when awareness is so crucial for survival? Some neuroscientists believe it is a kind of compromise. The brain is an energy-hungry organ, consuming nearly a fifth of the body's energy, even at rest. Maintaining full alertness continuously would be metabolically expensive. Flickers of dream state may allow tiny intervals of rest, little sips of recovery. Even while the larger system remains awake, it is as though the orchestra of the brain lets certain instruments drop out for a few beats, closing their eyes, while the rest continue playing. The music of consciousness continues, but with subtle gaps, historical glimpses of wakeful dreams. Writers, mystics, and scientists alike have noticed these thresholds. The ancient Greeks described hypnagogia, the moments before sleep, as a doorway to visions. Thomas Edison, the inventor, reportedly held ball bearings in his hands as he drifted off in his chair. When he slipped into that twilight state, the bearings would fall and clang onto the floor, waking him. He believed those microdreams contained flashes of creativity, fragments of thought that ordinary waking could not reach. The artist Salvador Dali used a similar trick, claiming he could harvest imagery from the near-dream state and pour it directly onto canvas. For them, the flicker between wake and dream was not a failure of attention, but a resource, a place where imagination could surface modern science on daytime. REM Contemporary Neuroscience confirms what these artists sensed during brief lapses of wakefulness. The brain sometimes produces theta waves, the same patterns that dominate REM sleep. These waves are associated with memory consolidation, emotional processing, and the weaving of dream narratives. When they occur in daytime, they might provide the brain with a chance to integrate experience on the fly. A study with tired participants asked them to perform monotonous tasks while hooked up to IG machines. Even while pressing buttons and tracking signals, their brains dipped into bursts of theta activity. Later, some participants reported strange moments of confusion, short blanks of awareness, or brief flashes of dreamlike imagery. They had, without realizing it, dreamed while awake. Time during the flicker. How long are these lapses? To the outside observer, they are measurable in seconds. But subjectively, they can feel strange, non-existent, because memory failed to record them, or oddly stretched, like a dream that unfolds in a blink. This is the curious thing about dream time. It does not map neatly onto clock time. A second of waking may hold minutes of dream narrative, so when the brain inserts dream flickers into the day, it also bends your sense of duration. Perhaps this is why moments of fatigue feel longer than they are, why boredom stretches hours into eternities, and why sudden daydreams can collapse time until you snap back and find the afternoon gone. The danger and the gift. There are two sides to this hidden dream state. On the one hand, it can be dangerous. Microsleeps while driving or operating machinery can lead to disaster. Our traffic controllers, surgeons, and pilots are trained to avoid fatigue precisely because even a second of lapse can have enormous consequences. On the other hand, the flickers may also be a source of creativity and resilience. Artists, as mentioned, have used them deliberately. Musicians sometimes report melodies arriving in that liminal haze. Writers describe sentences that appear whole, as though dictated by the drifting brain. And for ordinary people, those moments of drifting in class or in a meeting may allow the mind to connect dots it could not while rigidly focused. Philosophical reflections. The brain is never fully awake, never fully asleep. What does that say about consciousness itself? Perhaps it is less like a switch on or off and more like a tide, rising and falling, bringing with it debris of memory and fragments of imagination. At noon, while typing, you may be struck by a vision of a childhood street. Why? Perhaps because a microdream surfaced it, unbidden, from the networks that sleep normally activates. Philosophers of mind wonder if this suggests that dreaming is not secondary to waking, but a constant undercurrent. Dreaming may be the default mode of the brain, always humming in the background, with wakefulness layered on top. In that case, your waking life is simply a carefully curated version of dream time, edited for survival. The lived experience. Think of times when this has happened to you. On a long bus ride, eyes open, you suddenly realize you cannot recall the last few minutes of scenery. Or while reading, you wake up to find your eyes have scanned paragraphs without comprehension. In those moments, a flicker of dreams stole into your awareness, and you slipped into a hidden current. The next time it happens, you may notice that it feels like stepping outside of time, a pause, an absence, a brief vanishing. When you return, the clock has moved, but you cannot say what filled the gap. Closing image. So, even in daylight, the dream world touches you. It is not locked behind midnight and pillows, but flows into the day in tiny waves, unseen yet constant keys. Each flicker is proof that consciousness is fragile, elastic, and porous. You are never fully awake, never fully asleep. The two states intertwine, like threads woven into the same fabric. And as you sit now, perhaps listening in a quiet room, the thought may linger. How many dream flickers have already passed through you today, unnoticed? Asterisk, your wandering mind constructs gentle worlds, a face, a memory, a possibility half imagined. They arrive uninvited, like clouds drifting into the sky of thought. We call them daydreams, but in truth, they are not so far from the dreams of sleep. They are fragments of imagination layered to top the steady march of waking life. If you've ever sat in a classroom as a child, staring out the window at a tree, you've known it. The lecturer's voice recedes, the branches sway, and suddenly, you are no longer in the room. Perhaps you are climbing the tree. Perhaps you are building a secret fort among the leaves. Or perhaps you are not anywhere specific at all, just dissolving into a hazy warmth of thought where the boundaries of time soften. Daydreams are miniature dreams. They are the mind's rehearsal for the larger plays of the night. Neuroscientists sometimes describe them as spontaneous cognition moments when the brain lets go of direct input and begins to simulate, to construct, to invent. And yet, they are not meaningless distractions. In fact, daydreams occupy a surprisingly large portion of waking life. Studies suggest that nearly half of the time we are awake, our minds are not on the task before us, but instead wandering elsewhere. This wandering, once thought of as laziness, is now recognized as a deeply human cognitive tool for memory, creativity, and problem solving. Think of daydreams as a kind of soft research. While you are walking to the store or staring at the wall, your mind is pulling threads together, threads of memory, hope, fear, and experience, testing how they might weave into something new. The science of wandering inside the brain, daydreaming, often lights up the default mode network, a constellation of regions spanning the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. These regions activate not when you are focused on the outside world, but when attention turns inward. It is in this mode that the brain revisits memories, simulates possible futures, and even rehearses conversations that may never happen. In this way, the daydream resembles a laboratory, a place where the mind experiments without consequence. And just as in sleep, time behaves differently. Minutes spent in reverie can vanish quickly, collapsing into nothingness when the daydream ends. You glance at the clock and realize you have drifted for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes more. The gentle work of imagination daydreams are rarely as vivid as dreams of the night. They are soft sketches, half-formed, fading as quickly as they arrive. But even these sketches matter. Writers, musicians, mathematicians, many of history's breakthroughs began not in concentrated effort, but in distracted drifting. Albert Einstein once described his greatest ideas as thought experiments that came during idle wanderings. He imagined chasing beams of light, floating in space, bending through time. The daydream gave him a playground to test the limits of reality long before equations caught up, and for the ordinary mind, daydreams provide their own service. They allow us to rehearse social encounters, to imagine outcomes, to practice arguments we may never speak aloud. They also soften the weight of the present moment. In a long line at the post office, you might wander to memories of a beach, or to the possibility of next summer, or to a story you've been constructing in fragments. The boredom recedes. The world grows bearable. The emotional drift, there is also an emotional quality to daydreams. They can comfort, but they can also unsettle. A wandering mind sometimes drifts into regret, into old wounds, into worries that echo. This is why some psychologists note that not all daydreaming is restorative. And yet, even when the mind replays a mistake or imagines a fear, it is practicing resilience. Just as children rehearse life through play, adults rehearsed through daydream. The scenarios may never come to pass, but the rehearsal gives the psyche a way to prepare. Daydreams, in this sense, are like emotional stretching and unseen yoga of the mind that makes us more flexible, more ready for what might come. Between worlds, the curious thing about daydreams is how they blur categories. They are not quite sleep, but not quite full wakefulness either. They exist in a threshold state on edge between conscious focus and unconscious drift. Some cultures have recognized this edge as sacred. In certain traditions, moments of reverie are seen as windows into intuition or even the spirit world. To fall into a daydream was to open the self to inspiration, to signals from beyond the ordinary. Modern science explains this less mystically, but no less beautifully. The mind, when unmoored from tasks, becomes more associative, more willing to link distant ideas. Creativity blooms in this loosened soil. Time within a daydream, the physics of time inside a daydream is strange. You might imagine an entire journey, a walk through a city, a conversation with a friend, even a day's worth of events all in a span of seconds. The compression mimics what happens in night dreams, where hours of narrative can occur in the space of a few minutes of REM sleep. This elasticity is what makes daydreaming so seductive. It gives the illusion of stepping outside the rigid order of the clock. For a moment, you live in another time entirely. A time shaped by imagination rather than by ticking seconds. The return, eventually, the daydream dissolves. You blink, and the world around you returns. The lecture continues. The traffic light turns green. The kettle whistles. There is always a moment of return, sometimes with a jolt, sometimes with a sigh. And in that return you feel, for a heartbeat, the strangeness of time. You are away, and now you are back, and yet no one else noticed. The world continued its march, but you slipped into another rhythm altogether. This slipping, its gentle exit and re-entry, is the miniature of nightly dreaming. It is the rehearsal of forgetting and remembering, of losing and regaining the thread of time, the dream that never ends perhaps. In truth, waking life itself is woven of countless daydreams stitched together with moments of focus. Perhaps the boundary between dream and reality is not so sharp after all. When you imagine a conversation, when you picture a future, when you remember a past art to you, in a sense, dreaming while awake. The difference is only in degree, not in kind. And so, to call them miniature dreams is not just a metaphor. They are dreams, scaled down and scattered through daylight, little pockets of timelessness carried inside the hours. A closing drifting, then, of today. How many times has your mind wandered to what faces, what places, what fragments of possible lives? Each wandering was a small dissolving of time. Each was a moment when the ordinary dissolved into imagination. As you listen now, you may find your own mind beginning to drift. Words fade, images form. Perhaps you are already half inside a daydream, carried by the current of thought. Let it happen. For in the gentle play of daydreams lies one of the oldest truths, that the mind does not need to wait for sleep to enter dream. It can build, it can wander, it can dissolve into timelessness even here, even now, beneath the open sky of waking life. Asterisk, when people speak of sleep, wars, they usually imagine the long nightly retreat, the hours stretched across a bed, where time passes in blocks and the mind sinks into deep rhythms. Yet sleep is not always so orderly. Sometimes, when the body is tired enough, the brain decides for itself. It folds into silence in brief, startling episodes known as micro-sleeps. A microsleep lasts only a few seconds. It can happen without warning. A truck driver, staring at a highway that stretches endlessly into night, might blink. In that blink, the brain abandons wakefulness. A student, bent over a desk, surrounded by notes and lamplight, may find pen strokes drifting off the page as consciousness slips away for an instant. These episodes are not naps. They are fragments of dream time inserted into waking life, as if the brain cannot wait until night to repair itself. The remarkable thing is that these moments are not entirely empty. They can contain images. Some report flickers of half-drying, the sudden face of a stranger, a staircase that seems to appear beneath closed eyes, or a sensation of falling. The brain, briefly freed from the grip of the outside world, generates its own fragments of reality. These are slips of time, tiny lapses, where ordinary seconds vanish and something dreamlike replaces them. Scientists studying microsleep have found that parts of the brain switch off while others remain alert. The frontal regions, responsible for attention and planning, grow silent. The sensory areas dim, but the body does not collapse into full sleep. Instead, it continues its posture. The eyes may still be open. The body may still sit upright. A driver may even continue steering a car for a moment. Yet the mind is gone, pulled inward, as if through a narrow doorway that closes almost instantly. It is a reminder that sleep is not an all-or-nothing state. The boundary between being awake and being asleep is porous, like a shoreline where waves continually rush and recede. Microsleeps are the smallest tides, washing briefly across the land of awareness before retreating. But in those seconds, the person is absent from the world. Consider the experience of time inside such an episode. If you have ever nodded off during a lecture or while reading late at night, you may know the strangeness of resurfacing. Only a few seconds may have passed, yet it feels like you traveled somewhere else. Perhaps you caught a glimpse of a scene, fragment of conversation, the edge of a place that does not exist. And then you wake again, startled, with pen in hand or book slipping from your fingers. The room has not changed, but the continuity of time has been broken. A T stepped out of the river, if only for a moment. For some professions, these lapses are perilous. Pilots, long-haul drivers, medical residents, pacing through endless shifts all live close to the edges of wakefulness. A microsleep in such settings can mean disaster. Studies with electroencephalograms show how suddenly it can happen. One moment the brain hums with wakeful beta waves, and in the next, slow theta rhythms begin to ripple, marking the intrusion of sleep. The shift can happen in less than a second. Consciousness can vanish between one heartbeat and the next. Yet, in ordinary life, microsleeps reveal something about the brain's quiet insistence. It is as if the mind carries its own clock, one that cannot be ignored. The body may fight to remain awake, but neurons obey their deeper rhythms. They require rest. When denied it, they seize it in fragments, scattering dream dust across the hours of day. There are small stories tucked into these fragments. A scientist once described his experience during a late-night conference. He was exhausted, struggling to keep notes, when suddenly he saw himself writing a word that did not exist. He woke with the pen still moving. The invented word sprawled across the page like a message from another dimension. Such slips reveal how quickly the dream-making machinery of the brain awakens once consciousness loosens. It does not need hours. It needs only seconds. Another person, drifting into microsleep on a train, later recalled the vivid sensation of stepping off onto a platform, only to wake as the real train still hurtled forward. In those seconds, the dream built a world complete, enough to convince time inside the microsleep did not match the outer clock. This disjunction is perhaps the most haunting part. In 3 or 4 seconds, the brain can manufacture a scene that feels much longer. Just as in full dreams, time stretches and folds. Inside, you may walk a hallway, exchange words, feel entire moments unfold. Outside, only a heartbeat or two has passed. I think these episodes are windows into how elastic subjective time can be. Some cultures have noticed this boundary state. In ancient records, monks described sleep demons that visited in short bursts when they struggled to stay awake through night vigils. Sailors on long watches spoke of seeing islands or phantoms in the sea mist perhaps. Visions formed in these brief collapses of the waking mind, and soldiers in trenches, forced to remain alert, sometimes reported slipping into seconds long dreamscapes that felt as real as the battlefield around them. The modern world, filled with artificial light and screens, stretches wakefulness to its limits. Its microsleeps are reminders that we are biological beings, not machines. The brain demands intervals of restoration, and it claims them regardless of schedule. We may think of time as a continuous line, but microsleeps show how easily that line can fracture. Seconds disappear, awareness returns, but with gapstaining, blanks in memory where consciousness briefly folded away from another perspective. Microsleeps might be seen as natural punctuation in the text of wakefulness. Just as sentences need pauses, the mind too seems to insert commas of unconsciousness. These commas are not restful in the way of deep sleep, yet they carry significance. They reveal how fragile and shifting our grip on time truly is. Imagine reading a book where every few pages a single line is missing. The story continues, but with invisible gaps. That is how microsleeps shape waking life. A book with missing sentences. Most of the time, we never notice because the gaps are small, but they are there, scattered across moments of fatigue. In the end, microsleeps remind us that sleep and wakefulness are not opposites, but neighbors. They lean against each other, blending at the edges. A tired brain slips not in hours, but in seconds, carrying fragments of dream into the daylight. Okay? These slips of time, brief as they are, reveal the circular, elastic nature of human experience. 4. In those seconds, the ordinary flow of time halts. The clock on the wall ticks forward. The room does not change. But the self has been elsewhere, in a space where moments bend and dissolve. And when we return, there is only the lingering sense of absence and awareness that time is not always what the clock declares. When scientists first slipped volunteers into scanners and asked them to simply do nothing, they expected silence and idle brain, perhaps resting like a machine switched off. What they found instead was activity, humming, weaving, unfolding, almost louder than when tasks were demanded. This discovery was named the default mode network. And it has since reshaped our understanding of what the brain does when left to its own devices, rather than sitting still in emptiness. The brain drifts into currents of memory, imagination, planning, and self-reflection. In other words, it begins to dream, not in the full theater of night, but in quiet rehearsals, sketches, and fragments. It tells itself stories, reviews old ones, and constructs potential futures. This network is not localized in one place, but spreads like a constellation, linking the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, the angular gyrus, and deeper structures that together form a background hum of inner life. When you sit and let your thoughts wander, when you lie in bed before sleep, when you stare out of a train window, this network glows, and in its glow, a form of dreaming emerges. Wandering without intention, the brain's default mode often begins with small wanderings. A word lingers, a face rises. The sound of a voice from years ago, half forgotten, drifts forward. It is not deliberate. You did not summon it, and yet it comes. This is how the mind behaves when it is freed from the grip of direct tasks. Think of the way clouds form patterns in the sky. They are not planned. They gather, disperse, shift, reform, painting one shape, then another. The default mode of the brain works much the same way, generating images, associations, and narratives without conscious design. A child might daydream of running across a field. An adult might drift into imagining tomorrow's meeting or a conversation not yet had, or perhaps never to be had. These are not fully fledged dreams with their cinematic detail, but they share the same soil. They are rehearsals for the more immersive dreamscapes that arrive in sleep. Memory has claimed much of what the default mode network does is stir memory. But memory here is not like opening a book and reading a page. Instead, it is more like shaping clay. A moment resurfaces, soft around the edges, ready to be molded again. Perhaps you remember a holiday at the sea. The waves were loud. The air was salted. The sun warm. The default mode replays it. Details change. The light may seem brighter than it was. The sound may fade or echo strangely. Your mind may insert someone who is not actually there. This is not error, but process. Memory in the default mode is not passive storage, it is active reconstruction. And in this reconstruction, dreams find their foothold. By blending memories with imagination, the mind begins to weave something that is both real and unreal. A rehearsal for the dream state at night. The self as storyteller 1. The striking features of the default mode network is how strongly it relates to the self. It is the voice inside the head that narrates, explains, sometimes criticizes, sometimes comforts. It reviews what has been done, anticipates what will be done, and fills the gaps between. This inner narrator is not quiet, even when you wish it to be. It insists on building a continuous story out of life's fragments. This continuity of self, the idea that I am the same person yesterday, today, and tomorrow, is, in large part, the handiwork of the default mode. Yet, if you listen carefully, the tone of this narrator is dreamlike. It is not always logical. It shifts abruptly. It lingers on small things with exaggerated weight, blends memory, fantasy, and speculation. In its unguarded state, it creates a dream of who you are. The edges of sleep, this default rhythm becomes particularly noticeable in the liminal zone, when you are falling asleep or just waking. Scientists call this hypnagogia and hypnopompia. The default mode network is especially active here, and it is in these moments that you sometimes experience flashes, brief, dreamlike images, half-formed voices, a sudden sense of falling or floating. These are not full dreams. They are the background hum of the default network spilling into consciousness. The same structures that generate daydreams and wandering thoughts are now freed from external control, and the result feels surreal, often nonsensical. You might see a horse running in a meadow. Though you are not thinking of horses, you might hear your name whispered, though no one is present. These fragments are the seeds from which full dreaming grows once sleep deepens. The purpose of wondering, why does the brain do this? Why is it unable to simply rest in silence? One theory is that this constant rehearsal of memory and imagination serves survival, tying past experiences. The brain refines them, learns from them, and integrates them into the larger fabric of identity by imagining possible futures. What might be said? What might happen? The brain prepares itself for choices not yet made. In this sense, the default mode is an engine of prediction. It creates simulations, and those simulations guide behavior when real events arrive. Another theory suggests that the default network is essential to creativity. Many discoveries, insights, and solutions to problems emerge not during focused work, but during wandering thought. A mathematician may struggle with a formula all day, only to have the solution appear while taking a walk, the mind adrift. A poet may find lines forming while staring at the ceiling. A scientist may dream the structure of a molecule. The wandering is not waste. It is fertile ground. Time in the default mode. When you drift into this mode, time behaves differently. Minutes stretch or shrink. You may find yourself lost in thought for what feels like hours, only to glance at the clock and realize that 5 minutes have passed. Or you may emerge from 10 minutes of wandering that seemed like nothing at all. This elasticity is the same property that defines dreams. Awake, the clock rules. In the default mode, time becomes a soft material, expanding or contracting as thought drifts. This, too, hints at why the default network feels dreamlike. It obeys not the rigid ticks of the second hand, but the loose flow of inner narrative, the quiet connection. Another striking aspect of the default mode is how it links inner thought to social life. When you imagine what others think of you, when you replay conversations, when you construct possible dialogues, it is this network that lights up. It is as if the brain cannot stop rehearsing relationships, even when alone. You think of what you said and how it might have sounded. You imagine what another might reply tomorrow. You replay the gesture of a friend or the tone of a stranger. In this sense, the default mode is not solitary, but deeply social. It builds dreamlike rehearsals of connection. And in those rehearsals, you prepare for the unpredictable theater of human life. Dream before the dream. Perhaps the best way to think of the default mode is as the dream before the dream. During the day, It creates sketches, rough outlines, rehearsals, fragments. At night, when sleep takes hold, those sketches are expanded into full dramas. The continuity is striking. It's the same images and concerns that play in wandering thought often reappear in dreams. The same fears rehearsed in the day resurface at night. The same longings, the same unfinished business drift across both states. Thus, the default mode network is not separate from dreaming, but rather its daytime sibling, its quieter rehearsal, its constant preparation, the endless murmur in now. As you listen, as words unfold slowly, your own default mode is not entirely silent. It may wander for a moment toward a memory, toward a thought of tomorrow, toward something unrelated. That is the nature of the mind when freed. It resists stillness. It hums. It tells stories. It dreams, even in wakefulness. And so, the brain's default mode is not absence, but presence, not silence, but murmur. It is the background river that never stops flowing, the rehearsal that continues whether you notice it or not. The dream beneath all waking life. Asterisk memory is never a perfect mirror. It is more like a pool of water, rippling with each stone that falls into it. Every time you return to the same scene, Kia, you do not find the original reflection, but a version changed by the ripples of the present. Scientists who study memory call this reconsolidation. Each time you recall a memory, you do not simply access. It's like opening a file in a cabinet. You reopen it, lay it on the table of the mind, and, without realizing, you edit it. A color grows brighter, a face softens. A silence becomes longer, as though memory itself prefers a slower pace. In this way, memories resemble dreams. Dreams are not made of solid architecture. They are fluid. They shift, rearrange, and dissolve as you look at them. Test so too with memory. The difference is that memory pretends to be real. It insists on its authority. I was there, it says. I happened exactly this way. But beneath the claim of certainty lies the same shifting ground. Asterisk, think of childhood. Perhaps you remember your earliest classroom, the smell of chalk dust, the scrape of a wooden desk. Perhaps you see the face of a teacher, or think you do. But studies have shown that the earliest memories are often embroidered with imagination. You may hold in your mind a scene you swear is true, yet the photograph you later discover does not match the memory at all. Your brain has constructed a dreamlike version, stitched together from fragments. A story your parents told, a picture you once saw, a feeling you carried. This is why siblings often argue about the past. They were there together, but when they recall the same afternoon, the stories do not align. One remembers laughter, another remembers tears. Both are convinced, both are sincere, and both are, in a sense, dreaming, even in daylight. Neuroscience reveals that memory relies on networks deep within the hippocampus and cortex. These are not vaults, but webs. Each strand connects to another. A smell linked to a song, a taste linked to a season, a sound linked to a face. When you recall one, the others shimmer awake, and suddenly the past is not just an image, it is a mood, a bodily sensation. You are transported, and just as dreams often blur settings and people, memory, too, blends them. The cafe from one city may merge with the street from another. The friend you knew at 20 may appear in the scene from your childhood at 8. The brain is not interested in precision, it's interested in meaning. This is why memory feels so alive at night. As you lie in bed, the day's images dissolve into recollections of older days. You may drift from a meeting that happened hours ago into a playground 30 years ago, and as sleep arrives, memory slides easily into dream. Dreaming, in part, is memory's rehearsal. Your brain replays fragments, not to archive them, but to reshape them, to decide which to keep. which to soften, which to let fade. Consider the way grief lingers. In the first weeks after loss, memories of the one who is gone are sharp, bright, and painful. Each detail feels carved in stone, but over years, the edge is smooth. The sound of their voice becomes harder to grasp, like trying to hold water. What remains is not the exactness of the past, but the emotional core, the warmth of a laugh, the presence of comfort, the outline of love. Memory edits not to deceive you, but to let you continue living. Cultures throughout history have recognized that memory behaves more like dream than archive. Oral traditions, myths, songs, and stories were passed from one voice to another. No two tellings were ever the same, but the meaning endured. The memory of a people was fluid, reshaped in each performance, yet always carrying the echoes of what mattered most. The Greeks called this Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, mother of the muses. For them, memory was the wellspring of creativity. It was not about holding facts. It was about inspiring new song, new poetry, new vision. To remember was to dream forward, to allow the past to reshape the present. Modern experiments confirmed this fluidity. In laboratories, volunteers are shown images and later asked to recall them. Brain scans revealed that the very act of recalling reopens the memory for editing. If new information is given at that moment, a suggestion, a detail slipped in, the memory may absorb it, and the person will later insist that it was always part of the scene. This is why eyewitness testimony is so fragile. Memory is not a recording, it's a living, changing process. But memory is not only fragile, it is also powerful. Think of how a single scent can transport you across decades. The faint aroma of rain on hot pavement, and suddenly you are back in childhood summers. The smell of cinnamon, and you are in a kitchen long gone. These moments feel dreamlike, not just because of their vividness, but because they arrive without warning. Time folds, past and present, overlay, and you inhabit both at once. Such experiences remind us that the brain does not separate waking and dreaming as sharply as we imagine. Memory flows through both states. When you recall, you dream. When you dream, you recall. Each influences the other, braiding together into the story you call your life. Yet, within that story, there are always gaps. Hours forgotten, conversations misplaced, faces blurred. The mind fills them as a dream fills its missing spaces. You may swear that you remember, but in truth, you are imagining. And perhaps that is not a weakness, but a quiet strength. To live with memory is to live with creativity woven into your past. So, when you close your eyes tonight and drift into sleep, notice how memory begins its gentle work. Fragments of the day's surface, a conversation, a worry, a laugh. They stretch, bend, and melt into something new. This is memory echoing, dreaming while awake, dreaming while asleep. You will wake tomorrow with the past slightly changed, not because reality altered, but because your mind, ever fluid, ever dreaming, reshaped it for you. Asterisks, dreams, and imagination are stitched from the same cloth. The brain weaves possibilities as naturally as it breathes. If you close your eyes and picture a landscape you've never visited, meadow filled with bluegrass, or a city built upside down, towers hanging from the clouds here are doing something that draws from the same machinery as dreams. At night, the process is involuntary. Your brain conjures scenes and events without your direction. In waking life, imagination often feels deliberate, guided by curiosity or desire, yet both rely on the same networks of memory association. And synthesis. Scientists studying creativity sometimes ask participants to imagine alternative uses for common objects. A brick might become a paperweight, a makeshift weapon, or the foundation of a small garden wall. In the brain, These exercises light up regions that overlap with those activated during REM sleep. The implication is simple: whether asleep or awake, we are capable of recombining known elements, K, into surprising new arrangements. This is the fabric of imagination, the ability to stitch fragments together, K, a memory of a childhood friend, a sound of rain against the window, the smell of coffee in a dim cafe, woven together. They might become the setting for a dream or the seed of a daydream. Imagination is sometimes treated as a luxury, a talent for artists or storytellers, but it is more fundamental than that. It's how the mind rehearses survival. Long before humans wrote poetry, they imagined possible futures. The hunter considered where the herd might move. The gatherer pictured which valleys might hold berries next season. The parent imagined what dangers a child might face when wandering too close to a river. In that sense, imagination is not simply creativity, but foresight. It is simulation. Dreams and imagination both allow the brain to test scenarios in the safety of thought before they occur in the risk of reality. The philosopher Gaston Bachelard once wrote that imagination is a universe within the universe. He was speaking poetically, but neuroscience echoes the sentiment. The brain is never truly silent. Even in stillness, networks fire in quiet loops. The default mode network, active when we are not focused on the outside world, spins a quiet hum of associations. Out of this hum rise the beginnings of imagined possibilities. There is another parallel between dreams and imagination. Both tend to bend the ordinary. When we dream, reality is reshaped. Physics may soften. People appear and vanish. Time runs oddly. In imagination, too, we allow the unusual to unfold. Children play effortlessly in this space. A cardboard box is instantly a rocket ship. Stick becomes a sword. For them, the cloth of imagination has no seam between waking and dreaming. It is one continuous weave. Adults retain this faculty, though often with less freedom. Yet, even the most practical engineer must imagine new designs. Even the most serious economist must imagine models of future markets. Each act of speculation is a kind of dream, and sometimes the boundary blurs entirely. You may recall an event and be unsure whether it happened in waking life or in a dream. You may picture a conversation that never took place, yet feels real. The brain does not always clearly separate memory, imagination, and dream. They are threads from the same spool. Consider how language itself relies on imagination. Words are symbols that must be translated into mental images. When you read the word river, you might see the water glinting in sunlight. When you hear the word mountain, some internal picture stirs. Writing and reading are forms of guided dreaming, with the writer supplying the fabric and the reader weaving it, into images. That is why storytelling feels so natural in human culture. It is simply the collective use of imagination. We are dreaming together, agreeing on a shared landscape that exists only in thought. Music does something similar, though without words. A melody suggests a mood and emotion. From it, listeners imagine stories or scenes. The sound alone is a kind of loom on which the mind weaves its inner tapestries. Dream research has found that many inventions and statistic works first appeared as dreams. The chemist Auguste Quecot dreamed of a snake biting its own tail and awoke with the image of the benzene ring. Paul McCartney claimed the melody for Yesterday arrived in a dream. Writers have spoken of entire plots unfurling behind their closed eyes. Imagination in waking life is a way to invite this same process, to set the stage, to let the mind wander. In this sense, dreaming and imagining are not separate acts, but different shades of the same spectrum of inner experience. Why does the brain devote so much energy to weaving? One reason may be emotional regulation. Both dreams and imagination help us process feelings. If you imagine a difficult conversation before having it, you are rehearsing. If you dream of conflict with a friend, you are working through emotions. The imagery gives form to feelings that cannot always be neatly spoken. Another reason may be the preservation of flexibility. A brain that can imagine alternatives is less trapped in the present moment. It can adapt, predict, and innovate. From an evolutionary perspective, this is invaluable. A rigid mind would not survive sudden change. Okay? A dreaming, imagining mind can pivot. Think of fabric. It is made of threads, interlaced, forming a surface that is both flexible and strong. This fabric of imagination is woven of memories, sensations, symbols, and emotions. Some threads are vivid, sharp memories, intense feelings. Others are faint, half-forgotten details, echoes of sound. Together, they create a texture that holds. When you recall a childhood home, the fabric is stitched from pieces. The smell of old wood, the color of the kitchen tile, the sound of a parent's footsteps. Perhaps some details are imagined, filled in by the brain, yet the image feels whole. That is the power of weaving, the ability to create completeness out of fragments. There is also the question of scale. Dreams can be fleeting, fragmented scenes. Imagination can stretch into entire worlds. The novelist builds universes populated by characters who never lived. The architect imagines buildings that reach into the sky. Both acts draw on the same cloth, and there is no limit to the size of what can be woven. A single person may imagine a private memory. A culture may imagine a shared mythology. Nations are bound together by imagined stories, histories, heroes, symbols that exist in the mind yet shape the physical world. Even in science, imagination plays its role. To hypothesize is to dream with discipline. Stein often spoke of thought experiments, imagining himself riding on a beam of light. This act of imagination laid the groundwork for relativity. The boundary between dream and discovery is porous. Both are attempts to grasp what lies beyond immediate perception. So when we say that dreams and imagination are stitched from the same cloth, it is not just a metaphor. Neurologically, they share the same loom. Psychologically, they serve the same purposes of simulation, expression, and adaptation. And culturally, they form the basis of art, science, and shared identity. The fabric never stops weaving. Even as you sit quietly, your mind turns threads together. The hum of thought never ceases. Sometimes it becomes a daydream. Sometimes it deepens into sleep. Sometimes it sparks a new idea, like a river that splits into branches and reunites downstream. The flows of imagination and dreaming are separate yet continuous. One feeds the other. Both are essential, and as you listen, perhaps your own mind has begun to drift. Perhaps pictures are already forming behind your closed eyes. They are your own fabric, unique yet universal, stitched from the same cloth that has always bound human thought. There is a strange threshold the mind inhabits, a borderland between waking and sleep. In this space, the rules of daylight and the logic of night overlap, and something curious begins to happen. The mind, still tethered loosely to consciousness, starts to color the world with images that are not quite there. A coat on a chair looks briefly like a person. A faint creak becomes footsteps. Your name seems to drift across the room in a whisper that no one spoke. These are waking hallucinations, soft spillovers of dream into the open air. They most often come in two tides. One arrives as you are drifting off, hypnagogia, the descent. The other returns as you are rising toward morning, hypnopompia, the ascent. In both, awareness is uneven. Some networks of the brain are resting, others remain bright. The result is a layered perception, part outer world, part inner theaters superimposed like two translucent photographs in hypnagogia. Its pictures flicker behind your eyes without asking permission. Faces assemble from fragments and dissolve. Landscapes bloom, then vanish. You might hear a brief chord of music, perfectly formed and immediately gone, as though someone plucked a string in the night and let it ring out once. Often, these images carry no plot. They are more like sparks, brief, self-contained, and intensely vivid. Your body loosens, as if gravity has increased a little. In that looseness, the brain generates small, startling sensations. A jolt that feels like falling, a ripple of electricity down the arms, the sudden impression that the bed has shifted. None of it lasts. It is the nervous system changing gears, crossing a seam between modes. On the way back from sleep, the hypnopompic tide images grow more narrative. You may wake and still see a dream continuing on the ceiling, like the last seconds of a film after the projector has been switched off. People sometimes report hearing a sentence spoken clearly, as if a radio were left on in another room. A moment later, silence, or they feel a presence in the room, weightless and attentive, as though the dream has lingered to watch them wake. These experiences are common. The brain is reassembling waking consensus from the fragments of the night, and for a few breaths, the two worlds overlap. One of the most striking experiences in this borderland is sleep paralysis. In it, part of the brain wakes before the body does. During REM sleep, the phase in which most vivid dreaming occurs, your muscles are gently held in stillness, a protective pause called atonia that keeps dreams from becoming movements. Occasionally, the switch that releases this stillness lags behind the return of consciousness. You open your eyes, yet your limbs remain quiet. The room is visible, but heavy, as if underwater. Breathing feels deliberate. Sound seems muffled. In that suspended moment, the mind may conjure the shapes of fear, the sense that someone stands close, the idea that something leans on the chest. For centuries, cultures gave names to this sensation: visitors, night riders, the old hag, spirits that arrive with the dark. Science offers a gentler explanation, a brief overlap between two normal states: the atonia of dreaming and the awareness of waking. With the imagination filling the gap, there is comfort in recognizing the mechanism, knowing that the stillness will pass, usually within seconds. Sometimes a minute can soften its edge. It happens. You can treat the moment like a wave. Breathe steadily. Let the fear rise and fall. Watch the room with a soft gaze and wait for the tide to release the shore. Often, once the body catches up, the lingering images crumble on their own, like foam dissolving at your feet. Why does the brain paint the air at these edges? Partly because perception is a collaboration. Your senses deliver streams of raw information, glints of light, hints of sound, pressure on the skin. But the mind must interpret them. It builds the world by prediction, using memory and expectation to fill gaps. In bright wakefulness, the outer world dominates this partnership. At the borders of sleep, the balance tilts. Internal predictions grow louder. External signals soften. The mind completes the picture with its own brushstrokes. This predictive habit explains why simple shapes in dim light morph into living forms. The visual system looks for patterns, faces, bodies, motion, because finding them quickly has always mattered for survival. In the quiet hours, a coat becomes a figure. A shadow turns into an animal poised to leap. You blink, and the image returns to cloth and corner. The brain is not failing. It is doing its ancient work with fewer anchors. Emotion also colors these images. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure that helps tag significance threat. Surprise, meaning tends to be lively in the transition into and out of REM. If it amplifies, images acquire weight. A vague silhouette gains intention. A random creak becomes a message. This is why the presence you feel during sleep paralysis is often felt as watching rather than simply existing. The emotional network has leaned forward. and the scene. Takes on story. All waking hallucinations are unsettling. Some are tender, almost joyful. You might hear the voice of a loved one and understand, in the same heartbeat, that it is memory speaking. You might see patterned light on the wall, arrange itself into winged creatures, not frightening, but quietly beautiful, a harmless flourish as you drift. Hypnagogia could be a playground if approached without alarm, a place where the brain, released from tasks, shows you its raw canvases, line, color, spark, tone. Artists and scientists have visited this threshold deliberately. The surrealists courted hypnagogic imagery for inspiration, letting forms arise and tracing them before they vanished. Composers have awakened with melodies heard in that thin strip of consciousness and rushed to play them before the ordinary morning took them away. The threshold is fertile because it loosens the grip of expectation. Unusual combinations surface, unlikely associations glow. Waking hallucinations, approached with curiosity and care, can feel like postcards sent from your deeper networks. There is, too, a clinical face to these borderlands. People with narcolepsy, a condition in which the boundaries between sleep and wake are particularly permeable, often experience vivid hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations and episodes of sleep paralysis. Their brains slide more readily into REM features during daylight, as if the dream state is eager to arrive. Understanding this does not remove the challenge, okay? But it transforms the mystery into a pattern, a system with thin partitions, letting visions slip through like light between doors. Even without any disorder, long wakefulness invites the same permeability. On a night of missed sleep, the brain, hungry for REM, may sneak in its qualities during the day. A flash of a voice, a figure at the edge of sight. The message is simple and kind. Rest. The mind is asking to complete a rhythm. If waking hallucinations catch you by surprise, you can meet them gently. Let the breath be your metronome. Slow in, slow out. Name what arrives without argument. A voice, a shape, feeling a presence, and watch it from a quiet place inside. Naming takes the first thread of fear out of the weave. Turn on a soft light if darkness thickens the patterns. Listen to ordinary sounds, the refrigerator hum, a distant car, your own heartbeat tankers that remind the brain where it stands. Most of all, remember duration. These experiences are brief. They crest and fall. Your mind returns to daylight as naturally as the tide returns to shore. There is also wonder here. The border shows you how the world in your head and the world outside meet to form what you call real. For a few breaths, you glimpse the algorithm at work. Sensation plus prediction equals perception. At noon, the prediction is so well matched to the world that you hardly notice. At midnight's edges, the balance wobbles, and you see the stitching. The sight may be eerie, but it is also evidence of how tirelessly the brain works to make meaning from shadows. Later, when the light is full and the room ordinary again, you might remember the whisper or the shape and feel a soft gratitude. You're allowed to see the loom threads, crossing threads, memory tinting sight, expectation bending sound, just for a moment. The experience, brief as it was, can make waking feel clearer, steadier. You know now that your mind is a painter as well as a witness, and that knowledge can be calming. If it can paint fear, it can also paint comfort. If it can conjure a presence, it can conjure a companion. Your breath, your body, your steady attention. As evening comes again, the threshold waits. You may feel the first images assembling, the first notes arriving unplayed. You may find that, rather than resisting the border, you can float across it, letting the harmless visions pass like clouds. And if a moment arrives when awareness sharpens inside the strange scene, if you notice that you are seeing with inner eyes while outer eyes are open, you may discover something subtler still. The mind can know it is dreaming while awake. Okay? In that knowing, fear softens and curiosity brightens. which is where the next question gently appears, glimmering at the edge of the pillow. What happens when that noticing deepens when, in the midst of the blend, you realize with calm certainty, I am within a vision, and I am also here, and a lucid awareness begins to open like a quiet door. It's asterisk. There's a peculiar threshold in the human mind, one that blurs the borders between the certainty of waking life and the shifting landscapes of dream. This threshold is the space of lucid awareness, state where a person knows that the experience they are moving through is not bound by the ordinary rules of reality. Yet, at the same time, they are not entirely severed from those rules. It is an awareness that bends. Sometimes it happens within sleep, where one becomes conscious of the dream and can gently guide its course. Sometimes it happens while awake, when reality softens and imagined possibilities begin to fold themselves into the ordinary stream of perception. When we speak of lucidity, we are speaking of clarity. But lucidity in dreams is not always crystal clear. At times, it is like looking at the world through rippling water, distorted, half-lit, yet beautiful. The dreamer might stand in a street that feels both like their childhood neighborhood and a city they have never known. They may notice something uncanny, a clock with no numbers, a door that opens to the sky, and with a quiet spark, the realization arises, this is not the waking world. That realization does not always end the dream. Instead, it may deepen it. The dreamer can walk further, aware of the strangeness, but willing to stay. Lucid awareness is not limited to the night. In the day, while awake, the brain allows both the real and the imagined to coexist. This is most noticeable in moments of reverie. One stares at the horizon and half sees shapes forming in the clouds, or when memory intrudes so vividly that the room seems to dissolve. A person sitting in a train carriage may be at once aware of the rattle of wheels and the press of strangers nearby, but also of a strong mental picture of a beach long ago. The mind, in these moments, holds two truths without conflict. The seat beneath is real. The sea wind, remembered, is also real, though in another way. Scientists studying lucid dreaming often begin with the measurable. They ask sleepers to signal from within the dream by moving their eyes in a prearranged pattern. The dreamer, knowing they are asleep, can flick their eyes left, right, and electrodes capture the movement. This is proof, they argue, that awareness inside the dream is not an illusion of memory after waking. The person truly knew, while asleep, that they were dreaming. But what is harder to measure is the quality of that awareness. For many, it feels like a kind of expanded consciousness, a bridge between the rational mind and the dream-making self. In waking life, a parallel can be drawn with moments of altered perception. Hypnagogy, the drifting state as one falls asleep, is especially rich in lucid awareness. A person may hear voices that are not there, see shapes ripple across the ceiling, or feel a floating sensation. Unlike full dreams, these images and sensations arise while the sleeper knows they are not yet gone from the world. There is a dual consciousness, one part observing, another part surrendering. Hallucinations at the edge of sleep are not madness. They are simply the dream faculty stretching into waking. Throughout history, mystics and poets have been drawn to this liminal zone. In many traditions, lucid awareness was not merely an accident of sleep, but a doorway to insight. Tibetan Buddhists, for example, developed practices of dream yoga disciplines, intended to train awareness so that the dreamer remains conscious throughout sleep. By doing so, they believed one could explore the nature of mind itself, seeing how reality is constructed and deconstructed in the act of perception. Western philosophers, too, speculated on dreams and lucidity. Descartes famously asked how one could be certain of being awake at all, since dreams can mimic the senses so convincingly. His doubt still resonates. If the mind can produce convincing realities while asleep, what anchors us to the real when awake? Yet, lucid awareness is not always grand or philosophical. It often arrives in gentle, ordinary ways. Consider a child playing pretend, fully immersed in a world of castles or space travel. The child may know, faintly, that the cardboard box is not truly a spaceship, but they allow both realities to exist at once, the ordinary and the imagined. This, too, is a form of lucid awareness, though it is not labeled as such. Okay? The same is true for adults absorbed in a novel or a film. We know the characters are inventions, and yet we feel their joys and sorrows as though they were real. One of the most curious aspects of lucid awareness is its emotional tone. Dreams often sweep us along without consent, carrying us through fear, wonder, or confusion. But in a lucid dream, the dreamer can sometimes step back, like an actor realizing they are in a play. This detachment can transform terror into fascination. A nightmare of falling may become an exhilarating flight once the dreamer remembers, I can control this. And in waking life, when imagination overlays reality, lucidity can soften the edges of anxiety. Recognizing that the mind is weaving its own stories allows us to meet them with curiosity rather than dread. Still, lucidity does not always mean control. Many who experience lucid dreams describe a spectrum. At one end is faint awareness, the knowledge that one is dreaming, but little power to change the events. At the other end is full agency, the ability to fly, to summon places, to reshape the dream's narrative. Most experiences lie in between, where awareness ebbs and flows. Waking lucidity is similar. A person may drift into daydream, realize it, and then slip back in. The mind moves in cycles, not absolutes. Neurologically, lucid awareness is intriguing. Research suggests that during lucid dreaming, certain regions of the prefrontal cortex, the seat of self-reflection, are more active than in ordinary dreams. It is as though the part of the brain that questions reality stirs awake while the rest remains immersed in dreaming. In waking reverie, similar networks activate, the so-called default mode network, which spins narratives and simulates possible futures, blends with circuits that monitor reality. Awareness arises not because one is anchored fully in the world, but because the mind is aware of its own storytelling. For many, lucid awareness carries a strange beauty. It is like standing on a threshold, looking both ways into the solidity of the waking world and into the fluidity of dreams. Neither cancels the other. Instead, they intertwine, reminding us that perception itself is layered. Reality is not just what the senses deliver, it is also what the mind shapes upon that canvas. In this sense, lucidity is less about distinguishing dream from waking, and more about seeing the mind's role in both. And so, we return to the simple thought. Sometimes you know you are dreaming while awake. This knowing is not a flaw. It is a reminder of the richness of human consciousness, that we can inhabit two modes at once, reality and imagination, fact and possibility. The brain allows both to coexist, not as errors, but as expressions of its nature. To dream is to imagine. To be lucid is to see the imagining while it unfolds. And in that awareness, there is a quiet wonder, as though the mind is showing us its own fabric, woven from threads of waking and dreaming alike. Behind every thought, a quiet stage unfolds. Characters appear, conversations begin, as if your mind is forever rehearsing. This hidden theater is not confined to the night. It extends into the hours of day, running softly, like a play performed behind a curtain that is never fully drawn. You may not always notice it, but it is there in endless rehearsal, whispering performance that shapes the way you feel, act, and remember. Think of how, while walking down a familiar street, you might find yourself lost in an imagined exchange with someone you have not seen in years. The voice of that person rises with clarity in your mind, speaking words they never truly spoke, and yet the dialogue feels natural. This is the hidden theater at work, offering not the literal truth of the past, but a stage where memory and imagination intermingle. The mind, in this sense, never really rests, even when you sit silently in a chair, eyes fixed on the distance. Your thoughts may already be assembling a quiet performance. You are not merely thinking, you are watching. Narrator speaks. Scenery rises. Possibilities are tried out, then discarded. This hidden stage is ancient. Long before written stories or painted images, before language itself, the mind had already been rehearsing. To survive, early humans needed to imagine. They needed to picture the hunt before it began, to envision danger before it struck. The theater of the mind was their rehearsal hall for life itself. And even now, in the calm of modern rooms, the same mechanism continues. Scenes without audience. What makes this theater remarkable is that much of its work is unseen. You do not sit down and direct it, nor do you always decide what plays will be performed. Instead, it operates in secret, improvising without pause. Sometimes the plays are light, a daydream of traveling, conversations you might one day have. At other times, they are heavy, imagined arguments, feared disasters, regrets replayed. Yet, whether gentle or dark, the theater's activity carries a single truth: your mind is always preparing, always shaping, always rehearsing for futures that may or may not come. And though no audience sits in the seats, the theater performs as though the house were full. Characters stride in with confidence. The lighting shifts from shadow to brilliance. Entire worlds are painted across the stage in a heartbeat. Have you ever noticed how quickly the scenery changes? One moment you are recalling a small fragment of yesterday's sound, a phrase, and the next moment you are deep within an imagined future. Your mind's stage having redrawn itself in an instant. This is how the theater works, swiftly, silently, without rest. Dreams and waking plays. What we call dreams at night may be only the most vivid version of what is happening all the time. During sleep, the theater becomes unbound by external tasks, freed from the need to track the real world. The stage expands, and its performances take on extraordinary shapes, flying through skies, speaking with the long dead, happening landscapes that shift without reason. These are not so different from waking rehearsals. They are simply more intense, more immersed. In the day, the same process hums in a softer register. You imagine a meeting before it occurs. You rehearse words you may never say. You play both your part and the part of the other, constructing a dialogue no one else will hear. This is the daytime theater, subdued but constant. Some neuroscientists call this activity simulation. But the word simulation feels too mechanical, too cold. What happens in the mind is closer to poetry, to theater, to story. It is alive with nuance, emotion, rhythm. It is not simply a machine calculating. It is a hidden drama unfolding. Night and day. The brain's stagecraft to create this theater. The brain draws upon many tools. Memory provides the actors, people you know, voices you recall, echoes of places you have seen. Imagination paints the scenery, filling in gaps, adding light where memory is dim. Emotion directs the tone, whether the scene is tender, anxious, or joyful. It is as if the brain is both playwright and stagehand. One part of you sets the script, while another arranges the stage. And somewhere deeper still, an unseen director adjusts the performance, guiding it toward what matters most in that moment. Think of how often these rehearsals serve a hidden purpose. You imagine telling a friend about your day, and in doing so, you prepare the words you will use. You envision the steps of a task, and so rehearse it before your hands move. You replay a mistake, and in the replay, you quietly adjust how it might have gone differently. This is the power of the hidden theater. It is both entertainment and preparation, both wandering story and practical rehearsal. Teach wastes Nothing, even the strangest daydream, holds a kernel of use, if only to test out how you might feel. A theater without end. What is most remarkable is that this stage never closes. Even when you sit in silence, eyes unfocused, the curtain is rising again. Scenes are being cast. Voices are beginning to speak. Children live close to this theater. Watch a child at play, and you will see the stage made visible. The wooden block becomes a tower, the chair a castle, the doll a speaking friend. For adults, the stage retreats inward, becoming invisible, but no less active. We call it imagination, memory, rehearsal. Yet at its heart, it is the same theater that a child plays upon, a stage alive with endless scenes. As night approaches and the body surrenders to sleep, the theater only deepens. What was faint becomes bright. What was half-formed becomes complete. And yet, even then, you are both spectator and participant, both writer and actor, swept into performances that your waking self may barely recall. The curtain never falls behind. Every thought, a quiet stage, unfolds. The curtain is never fully drawn, the lights never fully extinguished. You carry a theater with you always, rehearsing endlessly for futures unknown, replaying fragments of the past, weaving together memory, imagination, and feeling. To recognize this is to soften toward yourself. Those wandering thoughts are not waste of time. They are the plays your mind must perform in order to remain whole. They are rehearsals for the next moment, even if the next moment never arrives in quite the way you imagined. And so, as you listen now, consider this: your mind is performing even in this instant. Characters are forming at the edge of awareness. Scenery is shifting quietly. A hidden theater is alive within you, and it has been for as long as you have lived. It will remain long after this moment passes, staging its quiet performances until the final curtain is drawn. Asterisk, if you were to look at your waking mind under the same scrutiny as scientists look at the sleeping brain, you would discover that the line between wakefulness and dreaming is not as clear as it seems. Chemistry, the flow of neurotransmitters, the sparks of electrical impulses, the subtle choreography of brain rhythms shapes what you experience. And even when your eyes are open, the stage of dreaming is still faintly lit, waiting for its turn to rise again. The chemical orchestra inside the brain. Thousands of chemical messengers are at work every second. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, gamma-aminobutyric acid GABA, glutamate. Each one has its own tone, its own role in the orchestra. They surge and recede like tides, shifting the state of your consciousness. Serotonin, often called the mood stabilizer, steadies your mind and keeps anxiety at bay. It also plays a vital role in regulating your sleep cycle, particularly the transitions between deep sleep and REM, the stage where dreams are most vivid. But even in the day, serotonin smooths your awareness, coloring your thoughts with a gentle warmth. Dopamine, the chemical of reward and motivation, adds sparks to the mind's landscape. Too much, and the world can seem hyper-real, even hallucinatory. Too little, and imagination falters. It is dopamine that fuels both the creativity of daydreams and the strangeness of dreamlike waking states. Acetylcholine, meanwhile, acts as a bridge between waking thought and dream narrative. It governs attention, but also floods the brain during REM sleep. Without it, both focused concentration and surreal dream imagery would wither together. These chemicals do not simply keep you awake or help you sleep. They create textures of reality. A chemical continuum. It is tempting to think of sleep and wakefulness as opposites, but neurochemistry suggests they are points on a continuum. At night, acetylcholine floods the brain, while serotonin and norepinephrine drop, allowing REM dreams to bloom. During the day, the balance shifts, but not completely. Codes of dream chemistry persist in waking life, nudging thoughts toward creativity, imagination, or even hallucination. the poet who sees visions in the ordinary, the scientist who suddenly grasps a solution. It is the weary commuter who slips into a micro-dream mile are influenced by this delicate chemistry. The difference is not whether dreaming happens, but how strongly its chemistry is allowed to rise into awareness. When chemistry overflows sometimes, these chemicals tilt too far. A surge of dopamine may bring visions during wakefulness, coloring reality with dreamlike qualities. This is why certain illnesses or conditions, such as Parkinson's disease or schizophrenia, involve altered perceptions of reality. In these states, the boundary between imagination and the physical world loosens. But even outside of illness, ordinary life contains moments of overflow. Sleep deprivation, for instance, heightens dopamine and alters serotonin rhythms, creating flickers of hallucination. Psychedelic substances, many of which act on serotonin receptors, intentionally dissolve the waking dream barrier, plunging the mind into a kaleidoscope of imagery. The chemistry is the same. What changes is the intensity, the everyday theater. Even in the most ordinary day, chemistry ensures that dreams never truly vanish. Think of the way your mind wanders when you are bored, or the sudden rush of nostalgia when a scent drifts by. These are not accidents. They are orchestrated by shifting patterns of serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine, subtly tuning your awareness. In a way, every thought is a miniature hallucination, guided by the same chemistry that animates your sleeping mind. Breathing and balance remarkably. Even the simple act of breathing alters this chemistry. Deep, slow breathing increases serotonin and calms norepinephrine, creating a dreamy calm. Rapid, shallow breathing tips the balance the other way, heightening alertness, sharpening edges of reality. This is why meditation, with its focus on steady breath, can feel dreamlike, as though the mind is both awake and floating. The ancient yogis, the monks who practiced stillness, the mystics who fasted all, were, in their own way, experimenting with neurochemistry. They learned, through practice rather than science, how to tilt the balance of chemicals to create visions. The fragile boundary, the chemistry of dreaming awake, reminds us that our experience of reality is fragile. It is not fixed, but continuously created. Every moment, neurotransmitters adjust the brightness of your awareness, the clarity of your thoughts, the texture of your imagination. You may think of yourself as awake, but chemically, you are always part dreaming. When serotonin dips, when dopamine sparks, when acetylcholine whispers, your perception shifts. The waking mind is not a fortress. It is a tide pool influenced by invisible currents. Why it matters to know this is not to strip away the wonder of dreams, to deepen it. For what you see when awake, faces, colors, voices, ideas, are not fixed truths. They are woven by chemistry, no less dreamlike than what you see at night. The only difference is consensus. Others share the waking world, while your dreams are yours alone. The chemistry that drives both is the same. The stage, the actors, the lighting, they may change, but the theater is always in motion. Closing thoughts, so the next time your mind drifts, or you see a vision in the corner of your eye, consider the chemistry behind it. Dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholinol are at play, painting reality, shaping the dream of being awake. You are, in every moment, carried by this quiet storm of molecules. Perhaps it is not that dreaming imitates waking, but that waking is simply another dream, one stabilized, sustained, and shared by chemistry. Asterisk, when the mind drifts, when it loosens its grip on the ordinary, rules of waking thoughts, something curious happens. Connections appear that were not visible before. Fragments of dreams, those fleeting images that often scatter as soon as we open our eyes, are not entirely lost. They linger, like dust motes, hanging in a shaft of light, waiting for the right breeze to stir them into form. It is from these drifting states that some of humanity's most remarkable works of art and science have quietly emerged. The act of daydreaming, okay, though often dismissed as laziness, is a kind of rehearsal space for the imagination. When you stare absent-mindedly out a window, when your mind wanders while walking down a quiet street, or when you let your thoughts float freely during a pause in work, you are entering the same terrain that dreams inhabit. The barriers between memory, sensation, and invention dissolve, and suddenly the brain begins to shuffle its deck of stored experiences in surprising ways. Think of the mathematician Henry Poincaré, who spoke of solutions arriving unbidden, not at his desk, but while stepping onto a bus. Or Mary Shelley, who described the terrifying vision that came to her in a half-waking state. What would become the story of Frankenstein? Or even the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who drifted into an opium-tinged dream and awoke with the vivid fragments of Kubla Khan, only to lose the rest when interrupted. These moments reveal a truth. Creativity often blooms not from rigid focus, but from openness to drifting thought. Dream fragments serve as sparks. Dream of flying may transform into an invention for flight. A dream of voices in a darkened room may turn into a novel. The imagery is raw, unfinished, sometimes nonsensical, but that is precisely what makes it fertile. It is not bound by practicality. Dreams have no need to obey gravity, logic, or chronology, and so, when their echoes seep into waking hours, they bring with them the freshness of a world unconstrained. In neuroscience, the link between dreaming and creativity is often tied to the brain's ability to form remote associations. During normal problem solving, the prefrontal cortex organizes thought in a structured, linear way. But in dream states, or in their waking cousin, the daydream, those rules soften. The mind leaps from one memory to another, sometimes by the faintest thread. The color of a childhood blanket might connect to the hue of a scientific diagram. A half-remembered voice might pair itself with a passage of music. The result is not chaos, but a new kind of order, one that surprises even the thinker. Artists have long understood the value of these drifting states. Salvador Dali, famously, practiced a method he called slumber with a key. He would sit in a chair holding a key in his hand, poised above a metal plate. As he drifted into the edge of sleep, the key would slip from his fingers, clatter onto the plate, and wake him. In that suspended moment, half-dreamt images and surreal juxtapositions flooded his mind, images he would then translate into painting. Thomas Edison, too, was said to use a similar technique, holding ball bearings that would drop and wake him just as he entered the threshold of sleep. What these figures sought was not deep sleep, nor full wakefulness, but the in-between state, where fragments of dreaming and alert awareness overlap. This liminal zone is like a doorway. Can those who linger there learn to carry back treasures from the subconscious? But creativity is not the domain of artists alone. Everyday life is filled with moments where dream fragments shape decisions, designs, or inventions. A cook experimenting with flavors may suddenly recall a scent from childhood, guiding the next step in a recipe. An engineer may see a structural pattern that resembles something glimpsed in a dream of trees or rivers. Even the ordinary act of solving a crossword puzzle can sometimes rely on the same loose, associative thinking that dreams encourage. There is also a gentleness to this process. To force creativity rarely works. It resists pressure. But to let the mind drift, to walk slowly, to sit quietly by a window or under a tree, that is when the unconscious begins to murmur. The fragments it offers are not always polished, They may be strange, fleeting, or incomplete. But like seeds scattered by the wind, they hold within them the potential for growth, if only one is patient enough to notice. The modern world, with its constant demands and interruptions, often crowds out these drifting states. Notifications, deadlines, and screens tighten the reins of attention, leaving little room for idle reverie. Yet, history reminds us that idleness is not waste, but incubation. The greatest leaps of imagination, whether in literature, art, or science, have often been born not from relentless focus, but from silence. Wandering can dreamlike pause. It is worth asking then, how many inventions, how many works of beauty have been lost simply because there was no space to drift? How many dream fragments vanish each morning with the alarm clock, never carried into daylight? Perhaps this is why some traditions have treated dreams not as illusions, but as gifts. The ancients often recorded them carefully, interpreting their symbols as messages or as seeds of inspiration. Today, even without mystical interpretation, we might benefit from the same attention. To keep a dream journal, to note down the fragments that surface during the day, is to acknowledge the hidden theater of the mind as a partner in creation. In this way, the border between dreaming and waking becomes less a wall and more a membrane permeable, alive, constantly exchanging material. You may be awake, but your mind continues to dream, and in dreaming, it continues to imagine futures, to reshape the past, and to offer glimpses of worlds not yet born. The fabric of creativity, then, is woven from both threads, the conscious effort of deliberate thought and the unconscious flow of drifting visions. To lean too heavily on one is to miss the fullness of the tapestry. To honor both is to discover that imagination is not something rare, reserved for geniuses, but a natural extension of being alive, breathing, and sometimes letting the mind wander. And so, as the day folds into evening, as your thoughts grow slower and the edges of your awareness begin to blur, consider that you are not merely resting. You are entering the same realm where poets find verses, where scientists stumble upon solutions, where painters glimpse impossible landscapes. In the drifting quiet of the mind, fragments of dreams are always weeding tiny sparks that, if tended, can become flames. Hallucinations, too, can accompany narcolepsy. These are not the simple phantoms of imagination, but vivid, sensory experiences nearly indistinguishable from reality. A person may see figures at the foot of the bed, hear voices whispering, or feel a presence in the room. Scientists call them hypnagogic hallucinations when they appear while falling asleep, hypnopompic hallucinations when they occur upon waking. Both reflect a brain caught in the liminal zone, unable to cleanly separate dream perception from waking perception to the person experiencing them. The effect can be terrifying or strangely awful. A shadowy figure may hover near the bedside, unmoving but palpable. The sound of footsteps may echo in the quiet of the room. Sometimes the hallucination is tactile, a pressure on the chest, a sense of being touched. Entire myths have arisen from such experiences, medieval tales of night demons, folklore of witches sitting on the chest, even modern reports of alien abductions. Many bear the imprint of hypnagogic visions. The condition reminds us how much of reality is constructed. The brain does not merely record the world, it builds a model of it. In waking life, the model is tethered to sensory input. In dreaming, it is untethered, free-floating, fared by memory, fear, and imagination. When the tether slips, waking life is painted over by this untethered model. The result is a blending of two modes of consciousness. Even those without narcolepsy sometimes taste this merging. After long nights without sleep, the exhausted brain begins to insert microdreams into the day. A commuter may blink and briefly see the road shimmer, a figure appear where none exists. A student cramming for exams may hear a voice call their name in an empty room. These are hypnagogic intrusions, evidence that the architecture of dreaming does not wait politely for night. It presses against the boundaries, searching for cracks. For many, the most startling betrayal is sleep paralysis. The body awakens, the eyes open, but the dreaming paralysis has not yet released its grip. Breathing feels labored. Limbs refuse to move, okay? And layered over this immobility are often hallucinations, figures leaning close, shadows gathering at the edge of sight, whispers lacing the air. The mind knows it is awake, but the dream state insists otherwise. Only when the brain fully shifts out of REM control does the body respond again. The event may last only seconds, yet it imprints deeply. Scientists trace much of narcolepsy and related disorders to the molecule hypocretin, also called orexin, produced in the hypothalamus. It stabilizes wakefulness. In many narcoleptic patients, these cells are missing or impaired. Without this stabilizer, consciousness flickers, swaying between sleep and wake. The person is left vulnerable to dream invasions. Yet even outside pathology, these states carry meaning. They expose the brain's hidden theater, the constant rehearsal of imagery, voices, and sensations that does not cease simply because we open our eyes. Most of the time, the curtain is drawn, the stage lights are off. But occasionally, through narcolepsy or hallucination, the curtain lifts. Waking life is forced to share the stage with dreams. Throughout history, those who experienced these overlaps were often treated as visionaries or cursed individuals. A shaman who heard voices at the threshold of sleep was believed to commune with spirits. A monk who saw luminous figures upon waking was thought to receive divine visitation. In villages, stories of witches, incubi, or restless ghosts often stemmed from the half-dreaming experiences of sleep paralysis. In modern neuroscience, we frame them differently as malfunctions of sleep-wake circuitry. But the wonder remains. Why does the brain weave such vivid realities when caught between states? I do the same neurotransmitters, acetyl, choline, dopamine, serotonin that guide ordinary thought also craft hallucinations. The answer lies in the brain's deeper function. It is a simulator, a maker of worlds. Whether awake or asleep, it generates environments, characters, and narratives. During the day, these simulations are tethered tightly to sensory input, constrained by external reality. At night, or in moments of disorder, the tether loosens. The simulator is free to invent without limit. For the person living with narcolepsy or hallucinations, the experience is not merely theoretical. It shapes daily life. The unpredictability of sudden sleep attacks can make work, study, or travel hazardous. Social interactions are strained when others misinterpret symptoms as laziness or inattention. Yet, within this difficulty lies a profound lesson. Waking life is not as firm a ground as we imagine. Consciousness is fluid, vulnerable, and deeply entwined with dreaming. Some individuals learn to navigate these states with a kind of acceptance. Rather than fighting hallucinations, they observe them, recognizing their dreamlike nature. Rather than fearing paralysis, they wait, knowing it will pass. In doing so, they reveal another side of the boundary's fragility. It is not only a weakness, but also a doorway. Dreams leaking into wakefulness remind us that perception is always mediated by the brain's internal theater. The solidity of the chair beneath you, the sound of a bird outside, the face of a friend are reconstructions. They feel stable only because the brain maintains a tight grip on consistency. But let that grip slip, and the world itself can shimmer, bend, or vanish. Thus, when the brain betrays waking, it is not truly a betrayal. It is a revelation. It shows us that the waking world and the dreaming world are not separate realms, but different shades of the same canvas. To live in a human brain is to live in constant negotiation between them, trusting that most of the time the line will hold, but knowing, deep down, that the line is thin. Asterisk, even when fully awake, your neurons pulse as if rehearsing a secret dream. Script. The truth is that the brain never really rests. What feels like quietness, what feels like stillness, is only the surface impression. Beneath it, a vast orchestra continues playing. each neuron firing, responding, predicting, and replaying. This is the hidden hum of life itself, theater of activity that refuses to dim its lights. Even in the bright clarity of daytime awareness, scientists once imagined that the brain must fall into idleness when not focused on tasks. Yet, in the early years of neuroimaging, when researchers peered at the brain during rest, they discovered something remarkable. Instead of silence, there was a complex network lighting up. This network, later named the default mode network, appeared when people were not engaged in problem solving, not speaking, not attending to the outside world. It was as though the brain, relieved of its duties, slipped back into its natural state, wandering, imagining, and quietly dreaming. In this way, being awake does not banish the dream. It only changes its form. Instead of the fantastical landscapes of nighttime sleep, the waking brain weaves subtler patterns, memories, fragments of conversation, small flashes of imagery, daydreams that appear and dissolve without announcement. Think of the moments when your mind drifts during a long train ride, when the rhythm of wheels on the track becomes a lullaby, and your eyes gaze at the passing scenery without focus. The world outside continues, yet inside, something else blooms. You imagine faces. You revisit moments from childhood. You hear voices not present in the carriage. You are not asleep. You are not entirely awake either. The brain is rehearsing possibilities, writing drafts of thoughts it may never deliver aloud. This rehearsal is not wasted energy. It is the essence of cognition. The brain rehearses so that it can be ready. It prepares conversations before they are spoken. It practices emotions before they are felt. It imagines disasters so that solutions may already be waiting when the time comes. Like a playwright writing endless scripts, it does not know which performance will make it to the stage. Teach, but it must keep writing regardless. The dreaming brain at rest also ties together the past and the future. During quiet reflection, the hippocampus, keeper of memories, sends bursts of replay through the cortex. Rats, navigating a maze, for example, will later rehearse the same paths in their sleep. Yet, they also rehearse alternative paths, routes they never took, as if simulating other futures. The same happens in humans. Our brain replays the day, but it also invents variations. It learns, it predicts, it prepares for what tomorrow may ask of us. Even as you sit in stillness, neurons pulse with remembered journeys and possible tomorrows. This is the secret script your brain continues to draft. You may never be aware of the entire play, but fragments reach you, an image that flashes uninvited, a sudden word on your tongue, a memory stirred by no obvious cause. Too many, this drifting feels like distraction. In schools and workplaces, daydreaming has been scolded as laziness. Yet, modern neuroscience suggests otherwise. The wandering brain is often at its most creative. By letting the mind rest, by stepping back from rigid focus, we allow the brain to knit connections that would never appear under strain. Artists, writers, scientists all have spoken of their greatest insights arising not at the desk, but during a walk, a bath, or a quiet pause. It is in these in-between states, when the brain rehearses softly to itself, that ideas emerge. But why does the brain dream at all, even when awake? One answer lies in its need to find patterns. To exist in the world is to be surrounded by noise, sights, sounds, movements, sensations. The brain, restless in its nature, cannot simply let these drift by. It must weave them into meaning, into narrative, okay? And so, it constructs, it imagines, it rehearses, cannot help but write its hidden play, even when the stage of consciousness is empty. Sometimes, this theater becomes too vivid. People who suffer from conditions such as schizophrenia or hallucination disorders often experience their resting brain as overwhelming. What is background rehearsal for most becomes full performance voices that speak without actors, visions that appear without scenery. In these moments, the line between imagination and reality thins. The dreaming brain asserts itself too strongly, spilling its rehearsal scripts into waking life. Yet, in quieter, healthier forms, this constant rehearsal is what keeps us whole. It allows us to practice compassion before meeting another's pain. It lets us process grief before it overwhelms. U.S. It gives us with the small relief of daydreams. When the weight of the present becomes too heavy, imagine again, you are lying on a bench in a park, the trees swaying softly, the world moving at its own pace. Outwardly, you appear at rest, idle, unoccupied. Inwardly, however, your brain is alive with quiet rehearsals. A memory of childhood drifts in the way sunlight once touched the corner of your room, the sound of a familiar voice. Then it fades, replaced by a vision of what dinner might be, or how a future conversation may unfold. You are not controlling this flow. It is the river of your resting brain, carrying fragments, weaving them, discarding them, and beginning again. And so, to call the brain resting is only half true. Muscles may pause, lungs may slow, but neurons are never still. They pulse, they hum, they create. They are forever rehearsing, forever dreaming. This is the hidden theater of the waking mind, a place without curtains, without audience, without end. And though we may never see the entire play, it shapes us all the same. For the stories rehearsed in silence prepare us for the world we must face awake. The dreaming brain at rest is not a contradiction. It is the foundation of what it means to be human. Asterisk. To pause here and consider this thought is to enter a realm where philosophy, neuroscience, and the quiet mystery of existence begin to blur. The idea that life itself might be dreamlike is not merely poetic. It is a proposition that has haunted human thought for centuries. When you open your eyes in the morning, you assume you are entering the solid world of waking life. But what is it that convinces you this is more real than the dreams you just left? The weight of the bed beneath your body, the light that strikes your retinas. These sensations are electrical signals, translated into experience by the same brain that only moments earlier conjured entire dreamscapes out of silence in both sleep and waking. You live inside interpretations, not raw reality. The ancient suspicions philosophers of the past were deeply unsettled by this. The Greek thinker Plato suggested that the world we perceive is like shadows cast upon a wall, mere illusions compared to a truer reality beyond our senses. Centuries later, the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi dreamed he was a butterfly, only to awaken in wonder. Was he Zhuangzi dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being Zhuangzi? Even René Descartes, father of rational thought, feared that waking life could be a dream he had yet to wake from. His famous conclusion, I think, "Therefore I am," was his desperate anchor against this uncertainty. He admitted he could not prove that everything around him was not an elaborate illusion, and still suspicion lingers. Neuroscience and the thin veil modern neuroscience adds weight to the mystery rather than dispelling it. Every sensation you rely upon sight, sound, touch, taste, smells not reality itself, but an interpretation. Light waves strike your eyes, vibrations reach your ears, molecules brush against receptors on your tongue and skin. The brain gathers these signals and, with exquisite efficiency, stitches them into a seamless experience. But this seamlessness is deceptive. Gaps are filled with guesses. Blind spots are patched over. Memories are layered on top of perception, coloring how you interpret events. In truth, you never perceive the world directly. You perceive the model of it your brain constructs. Dreams prove this. No external input. Your brain can conjure a city that feels solid, a conversation that feels authentic, even pain or joy so vivid that your heart races. If the brain can do this in sleep, what assures us that waking experience is fundamentally different? The machinery is the same. The theater of consciousness, some researchers describe the mind as a kind of inner theater. On its stage, perceptions, memories, and expectations appear as characters. They move and speak as though they are real, and you, the audience, believe them. But behind the curtain, the stagehands are neurons firing, neurotransmitters releasing, and circuits lighting up in synchronized patterns. The theater is convincing, so convincing that you rarely question it. Yet, once in a while, through dreams, hallucinations, or deep introspection, you glimpse how fragile it is. You see how easily the script can change, how quickly the stage can transform. Life as a dreamscape, life is dreamlike. Then perhaps what matters most is not whether it is real, but whether it is meaningful. Dreams are fleeting, yet they can move you, terrify you, or inspire you. Waking life, too, is fleeting. What makes it valuable is not its permanence, but its texture, its depth, its capacity to be felt. Artists often describe moments of creativity as dreamlike. A painter's vision emerges as though from nowhere. A melody drifts into the mind of a composer, or a scientist stumbles upon a solution after hours of daydreaming. These breakthroughs remind us that imagination and reality are never far apart. Both arise from the same woven fabric of consciousness. Fragile perception, the phrase, stitched together by fragile perception, is perhaps the most haunting of all. It's fragile because perception is so easily altered by fatigue, illness, stress, or even the simple passage of time. Two people standing in the same place will often see the world differently. It's filtered through their unique minds and stitched because the brain is constantly patching, connecting, and weaving fragments into wholes. The world you see is less like a photograph and more like a quilt, pieces of sensory input, memory, and expectations sewn together. When this stitching falters through neurological conditions, trauma, or altered states, you glimpse the cracks in the illusion. Hallucinations bleed into waking life. Memories play where present perception should be, and you realize it has always been stitched. It has always been fragile. A gentle conclusion life as a waking dream does not diminish it. If anything, it deepens its mystery. To live within a dream does not make the dream meaningless. It makes it precious. For like all dreams, it will end, and in its ending, its beauty will be revealed in full. So, perhaps the question is not whether life is a dream, but how we choose to move through it. Do we walk blindly, or do we marvel at the fragile stitching that holds our perceptions together? In the quiet of reflection, you might realize to be alive is to be dreaming with open eyes, forever moving through the theater of the mind, forever balancing between illusion and meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Asterisk when you open your eyes. A question arises soft, almost imperceptible. Are you waking from sleep, or are you stepping into another dream, one clothed in the fabric of sunlight and motion instead of shadows and mist? This gentle question is as old as thought itself. Philosophers, poets, and mystics have circled around it for centuries, unsure whether the world we call waking life is more solid than the fleeting landscapes of dreams, or whether both are variations of the same mystery. To live is to dwell inside perceptions, and perception is never absolute. What you see, what you hear, what you believe to be real, all of it, is mediated through the brain's interpretive web. When light strikes the eye, it does not deliver reality, but only signals. The mind interprets these signals, fills in gaps, and makes them coherent enough to navigate. Yet the same mind, in dreams, also constructs rivers and mountains out of nothing but electrical sparks. The question then becomes, how do we know which dream we are in? The philosophy of the waking dream in ancient times. Hindu philosophers spoke of Maya, the great illusion. According to their vision, the world we take as firm is more like a veil in appearance. It's a shimmering projection, masking the deeper truth. Similarly, the Chinese sage Zhuangzi wondered. After dreaming, he was a butterfly, whether he was truly a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being a man. This story endures because it touches the heart of human doubt. If both waking and dreaming are experiences, then on what grounds can we declare one to be more real than the other? Western thought also wrestled with this. Plato's allegory of the cave suggested that humanity lives watching shadows, mistaking them for reality. Descartes, centuries later, famously questioned whether an evil demon might deceive us into believing in a physical world that does not exist. In modern times, simulation theories echoed the same hesitation, suggesting that what we call waking life could itself be a dream inside a machine. But the gentle question is not only philosophical, it is personal. Each morning, as eyes flutter open, we accept the transition without pause. We assume the dream is over and waking life begins. Yet in truth, both are tapestries woven by the same loom, the brain. The neuroscience of the borderline modern science gives us another language to explore this question. When a person dreams, the brain's default mode network hums with activity, conjuring images and narratives. The prefrontal cortex, which usually evaluates reality and imposes logic, steps back, allowing imagination to spill unchecked. Upon waking, these networks do not simply vanish, they remain active, shaping memory, expectation, and imagination. When someone daydreams, our brainwaves often resemble those of light sleep. When an artist sketches visions from nowhere, or when a mathematician suddenly perceives a solution after hours of failure, the brain has allowed dreamlike fragments to surface in waking. The line between the two states, science shows, is thinner than we once believed. Even more telling are conditions like hypnagogic hallucinations or sleep paralysis. In these moments, dream imagery invades waking awareness, and the body is held hostage between two worlds: a figure at the foot of the bed, a voice in the ear, a pressure on the chest. These are dream realities spilling into daylight consciousness. The person feels awake, yet the dream has not let go. Such experiences remind us that waking is not as firm as it appears. Waking life as narrative, both waking and dreaming share another feature. They are built as stories. In dreams, the brain stitches fragments into a loose narrative. In waking life, the same occurs. Memory selects, edits, and interprets. The mind strings together moments into a coherent autobiography, one that explains who you are and where you are going. But like dreams, these stories are not fixed truths. They are reconstructions, stitched from perception, habit, and desire. The gentle question arises again. If life is narrated into coherence, how different is it from the dream that arranges improbable events into meaning? When you awaken and step into your morning routine, is it truly less dreamlike than the landscape where mountains dissolve into oceans in an instant? Perhaps what differs is not the structure, but the rules. The waking dream obeys physics, while the sleeping dream does not. Yet, both are fragile and fleeting, sustained only by the brain's ceaseless activity. The fragility of certainty. What? Waking life is often shared agreement. We call it real because others perceive it too. If you point to a tree and your neighbor sees it, you trust its existence. In dreams, the figures you meet vanish upon waking, leaving only private memory. But even this shared certainty is not beyond question. History shows us countless moments when groups of people misperceived reality together. Mass hysteria, mistaken sightings, cultural myths taken as absolute truths. Agreement does not guarantee truth. This recognition unsettles the foundation of waking life. If what we take as real depends on the limits of perception and interpretation, then waking may be just a collective dream sustained by billions of minds weaving similar threads. The gentle question has comforted this uncertainty need not provoke fear. There is comfort in imagining that life is a dream. For dreams are not meaningless. They are rich with emotion, imagery, and metaphor. 2. See waking life as dreamlike can soften its edges. It allows mistakes to be reframed as passing illusions, grief to be recognized as temporary, and joy to be savored as a fragile wonder. Mystics across traditions often embrace this view. To them, awakening is not about leaving sleep, but about realizing that all states are dreams within a greater reality. Zen teachers sometimes say, awake from the dream of waking. The gentle question then becomes an invitation to live lightly, to treat experiences as flowing images rather than permanent marks, drifting toward the infinite. When you open your eyes each morning, you may imagine yourself stepping from one dream into another, both equally mysterious. The landscapes differ. One is shaped by physics and culture, the other by unconscious desire, but both are mirrors of the mind. To live is to dream while standing, walking, breathing. And so, the gentle question persists. What if reality is not about choosing between waking and dreaming, but about recognizing the dreamlike nature of both? What if opening your eyes is not an end to dreaming, but the beginning of another? This soft thought lingers as the day unfolds. Whether in sleep or in wakefulness, the mind never ceases to weave. It paints the world with color, texture, sound, and meaning, stitching a story from silence. To ask, am I waking or dreaming, is not to demand an answer, but to embrace the mystery itself. Perhaps the truest wisdom lies in holding the question gently, like a fragile flame in the palm, illuminating the path without burning certainty into stone. And so the chapter closes, not with an answer, but with an invitation to walk through life as though moving through a dream. Each moment fragile, fleeting, and endlessly profound.